And I'll start by thanking Mary for that introduction. Thank Natasha for putting all of this together. And especially thank Javion. This is a busy man, and he's taken time out of his schedule to share his knowledge. And I can tell you, he has a lot of knowledge to share. So, welcome to everyone. Trees That Feed is hosting this. You all know about Trees That Feed Foundation. Our mission is planting fruit trees to feed people, create jobs, and benefit the environment. And especially creating jobs. That's a big part of keeping the trees alive and the benefit to the environment. When we have, we love to help people to plant trees and everything, but what we love is when we see people that have become independent and don't need as much hand holding. They're launched successfully. And if you can see Javian on your screen, you are looking at a successful man. And so he is sharing a lot of his knowledge with us. And so we'll ask Javian, welcome, my friend. It's really good to see you. So tell everybody a little bit about yourself. Now, I know you grew up in Jamaica and you probably grew up eating breadfruit, right?
Yes, definitely. As you mentioned, I grew up in Jamaica. I actually moved to the US when I was starting university. So I actually started university in UTech in Kingston. And then after a little while, I transferred from Kingston here to the US, and I finished up my bachelor's in mechanical engineering. And then with some aerospace, and then I went on to complete my master's in industrial and management engineering here in the States. And since then, I kind of, after graduation, kind of came out into the world, and it's like, I wanted to make a difference. And so I got into product design. And so I designed a couple of products for a company that I worked with. We actually created like two patented concepts. So we have with the USPTO, I had two patents. And then I kind of wanted to do other stuff on my own. And that's where the concept of figuring out a way how we can like bridge the gap that exists between the US mainstream shelf and products that I see going to waste in Jamaica, like breadfruit. Because if you look on the shelves in the US, you see 500 different brands, but really it's either going to be wheat, corn, or potato. That's going to give you those snacks. And so the idea was like, I know, visitors love breadfruit when they get it in Jamaica, but there's a concept that's called a Maya concept, which is most advanced yet acceptable. And so you're not going to change people's habits essentially by forcing them to do things completely different from the way they understand. And so I kind of like apply that and figure out, well, if I make chips, which is something that people are already consuming, a trend of gluten-free is developing. How can we take now breadfruit, which is a superfood, a lot of it going to waste, and turn that into valuable finished product for the mainstream market? And that was kind of like some of the driving idea behind developing this, except in addition to just the fact that I just love breadfruit and I wanted to eat more breadfruit. And I wanted to figure out ways how to get it when it's like, oh, it's limited shelf life was limited. So how can you find other ways of making this product available across a broader geographical spectrum, but also across a longer shelf time that you can sit in your pantry for months and months and months and still be edible when you go to consume it. So that's some of the basic background behind me. I'm an engineer. I know you can call me a nerd. I love business. I love going out and talking to people. I love a global mindset. I participate a lot in the global community. Love traveling internationally and having all the impact I can have for this wonderful time we have here on this planet.
Excellent, excellent. That's a good background. I'm fond of engineers, so I think that and in a different life maybe I would have been an engineer. So, but this time it's a little bit different around.
I
So,
must I must add though, you have developed some really good gelatin products. So you're officially an engineer in the categories of the Wright brothers.
oh my gosh, oh my gosh, that's you know, I did a lot of work on the hybrid solar dehydrator, which is actually becoming very popular. And that's one way to preserve breadfruit because breadfruit, as you know, has a short shelf life. So you have to preserve it, whether freezing or drying or something. Otherwise, it's going to spoil quickly. That's why there's a lot of waste. And so that's one of the things we're encouraging folks to do is avoid that waste. You're not taking fresh fruit away from anybody because when the breadfruit is bearing, it's more than you can possibly eat. right? So when there's that excess, you preserve that. So now you have food products. So year round. So what would you say, or tell us a little bit about your products and what do you think are the best ones, the most nutritious, the best selling? Because I know you have quite a few different products.
Yeah, that's a good point. So we have really three categories of product. And part of that was kind of more strategic in that. Um, so initially we started off with the breadfruit chips, and that story is an interesting one because that story kind of like that kind of started from the idea of like what happened when you slice potato really thin, and like that like watching something around that, and it's like okay, what happens when you slice breadfruit really thin? And like from there, it went to I had a meeting with the tourist board in Miami, and I brought up some I had a chef that's like, hey, slice some breadfruit really thin. And we got them in some Ziploc bags. I still have pictures of those Ziploc bags. And at the time, too, I started out with like some ackee dip. So we had some ackee dip that I was like, okay, breadfruit and ackee, ackee and saltfish and breadfruit, it's like everybody's going to love that, which they do. But once I kind of like had this meeting in Miami, went down to the tourist board and we are sitting down and we are eating, and everybody in the office was just like, oh my God, this thing tastes great, like, and I remember someone there said, I think it was Miss Wright. I think it was Miss Wright that said it. And she's like, the problem with Jamaica is a sample culture. Jamaica come up with all these wonderful products, but then I can't find them. And I was like, you know what? That's not going to be the case of this product. We're going to make it, we're going to scale it, and we're going to make it available. And so that kind of like was kind of like some of the driving factor behind. So the breadfruit chips was like that initial venture into the breadfruit space, at least in the public space. And then from there, I started running into an issue where, just like it was mentioned, it's a sample culture. So we started like making, but I didn't realize how fast we'd actually sell out. And this is in the middle of the pandemic. That was like the first time we kind of launched. This was like March of 2020. And then the idea was I was going to work with like a co-manufacturer, and then he was going to like, produce these products. And I had some of the samples sent in the middle of right before the pandemic hit. I remember I was going to New Orleans that weekend, and I stopped and I went to the vendor because I had a meeting there, and went over there and said, okay, let's practice how to do this. And then they sent in the breadfruit the wrong way. And so the core manufacturer got it like upset and I was like, this is not working. Like this can't work. Then after that, because of the pandemic restrictions, we weren't really able to get back in that core manufacturing facility. So then I had to figure out like, now we have to figure out a way how to get this thing produced and that led to trying to like produce this thing in like a commercial kitchen space and like all of that. But then what kept on happening was the products kept on selling out. So we just couldn't produce enough product. And then we started running into issues. When you're shipping items from sea level country to the mile high city, like in Colorado, there are things that you just don't account for that happens. And so all of that combined. So because the product started running out, I'm like, okay, what is the next category? How can we expand this category? Thinking of it from a real estate play. How can we expand this category? And so the next thing was like, breakfast is a big thing. How can we get into the breakfast space? What can we put into the breakfast space? And then that's kind of how the pancake mix came about. And so spent about like 10 to 12 months like developing pancake formulations, coming up with different ways. And then, okay, we got like a great tasting pancake. Now we have to like fine tune it down to like, how can we actually get this manufacturable? And how can we do that in such a way where the variables that is like affecting our manufacturability can be limited as much as possible. And so we launched a breadfruit pancake. I think in 2021. And a part of that was, if the chips are selling out, we still have a market. How can we find something more stable to keep selling while they run out of chips? And that was the breadfruit pancake. And in 2022, we kind of like did a similar assessment and like got into the baking space and launched the breadfruit muffin mix. And so those three items have really been the kind of the background of what we've kind of dove into. So we got our breadfruit chips, we got our breadfruit pancake mix, got our breadfruit muffin mix. And then after we launched the breadfruit chips, started figuring out ways and means how to like, enhance that experience for customers. And then we launched the Jamaican jerk breadfruit chips. And then we launched the Yardie barbecue, playing on that term, Jamaican Yardie. And just like put a barbecue on it. But if you read it from an American standpoint, you see like, oh, a yard barbecue with a DI on the end. So we kind of like think about how we can also market and make it, playful at the same time, like tell a story as to what we're doing with the brand.
You know, listening to all of that, you've encountered a lot of problems, a lot of obstacles, but you have been able to address those, to get over those. And so that to me is one of the most impressive things about you and becoming a successful entrepreneur. But I can even see some problems that tell me how you solve those. So for example, one question that I always have in my mind is are we going to be able to get enough breadfruit? Okay, and so can we really scale this business to where it has a presence in the large markets, US, Canada, uh, wherever? Is that something that you're addressing as well?
But definitely, for any business, especially like a manufacturing business, supply chain is a very, very big piece of what we do. Our COGS have to be manageable. So cost of goods sold has to be like in a manageable range. One of the things with like developing a product like breadfruit, focus around breadfruit. One of the great things is like people love our product. It's like, oh, it tastes great. Whether you like it, whether you know what breadfruit is, whether you don't know what breadfruit is, whether you like breadfruit, whether you don't like breadfruit. We've seen across the board people just like, oh wow, this actually tastes like something I can eat. And especially like I've seen people who like this is the best potato chips that's not made of potato. Like we hear that like consistently across the board. And so it's a gluten-free and superfood option. But as you mentioned rightly, ensuring that we have the actual metrics behind that business and that brand is a critical part of what we're trying to do. And for us, what we're trying to do is like build as best we can relationships with our different farmers. But on top of that, it's not necessarily just a farming problem. It's not necessarily just like an agricultural quote unquote problem. A big part of it is a logistic problem. So most of the countries that are probably going to be doing well in the breadfruit space, at least from a supply side in the breadfruit space, are going to be based in the tropical regions of the world. Unfortunately, that's also one of the regions of the world with the least adequate infrastructure for logistics purposes and high energy costs. So, for example, Jamaica, we pay about 36 cents per kilowatt hour, whereas here in the US, we pay about 9-10 cents per kilowatt hour. And so the problem with that is it makes you kind of your cost becomes a lot highly infeasible to address a lot of the market needs. But at the same time, we still have to work with what we got. Our product right now is more of a premium product. So it gives us a little bit more wiggle room on what we can do to kind of solve some of those problems. Whereas if we were focused on like high volume initially product, like it would be really hard because to get that high level of efficiency that we would need to be able to supply at those volumes at a very low margin would probably be a lot harder. That being said, when you're also not playing at like the bigger volume numbers, there's a lot of advantages that you don't get. For example, your packaging cost is going to be higher because your unit cost per packaging is a little bit higher than if you were shipping out 1 million packages of the same on the same order. So what we do though is not necessarily focus on what's not there, except in the case that we want to focus on what's not there to be able to implement it or figure out a strategy around it. We try to focus on like, what do we have? So for example, Jamaica has a relatively lower costs in terms of labor costs. And so, okay, that's an advantage you can take up versus like the labor costs here in the US. And that's one of the reasons that kind of like led us to make a decision to establish manufacturing in Jamaica. Because, when we're paying someone here in the States to try to produce this product, I learned really fast that like, if your model say you're going to be producing, 10x of something every hour, once you kind of outsource that to like a staff in your line, if you can't do it at 50% of whatever your highest expectation of that is, it makes no sense to do it. And in many cases, you're probably going to have to go down to like 25% of whatever that capacity is. So you have to be able to survive in a situation where your capacity can only perform at 25%. And so with all that considered, we kind of like put that in play and figure out, okay, how can we do that? Now, it wasn't easy even making that transition. That's the whole next thing, because now you get into the side of like the people side. So you find people who are like, might not necessarily be as like, as ethical as you would like them to be. And so you have to figure out ways how to overcome that. And I'm not gonna lie, in every one of those cases, those setback at times have you questioning, like, do you continue or do you stop? But the one thing guaranteed when you stop is that you're not gonna get to where you're trying to go. And then you have to kind of like get up with this delusional mindset in a way of like, at least if I keep pushing, I have a chance.
Excellent, excellent. It's problem solving all the time, right? But I think you've done just an outstanding job of that, and you're putting a lot of thought into every aspect of the business. So tell me a little bit about your customers. So that's been a lot about how you've been able to produce product. How do you know what products are going to sell? A lot of your customers, I think, are in the US, so a lot of them may not have heard about Breadfruit. Do you know who your customers are? How do you know what they might like?
Yeah, so that's a good question, because that really is the point at which determines your business, how your business go forward is like how well you sell into your market. And as I mentioned a little while ago, was that we are kind of focused more on like a little bit more on that premium side market. So we are not necessarily like a discount brand. If we were a discount brand, we probably be doing like way 10 times, 100 million times more volume. Well, if we could sustain it, that's a different question. But we are a brand that's focused more around people who like what I say, it's like people who want to spend every dollar, make it count, and have that dollar do as much good as possible. So when you're going out to eat, and I think of myself as one of those consumer where I take my microbiome pretty seriously. I consider what goes into my body pretty seriously. So I'm a part of that market demographic that like try to eat simpler foods, try to eat food that like actually nourishes me. Also trying not to overconsume these foods that might not necessarily, even if they're nourishing or not, like overconsumption of it is a different story. So because I'm in that market and I look at myself in that way, I think to myself, like, what are some of the things that I would want? And that's one side of the story. The next side of the story is going out and clashing your idea with reality. So part of when we started out was one of the big part was farmers market. So there was like online market and farmers market. And in COVID, I had a great farmers market experience, interestingly, because people just wanted to come out and like talk to people. And so we would go out and like get the products in front of people and say, hey, what do you take on this? Before we even like make packaging, before we did any of that, we just like get our pancake mix and we go out there and we like make some pancakes and give people like small samples and hear what their takes on it are. They couldn't believe, first of all, that our products only have 4 ingredients. They couldn't believe that our products were actually like a gluten-free product. They couldn't believe that our product tasted good without any kind of additives or preservatives. Our products still today have no preservatives in it. It's all natural product that you consume as if you would like get it as close as possible to off the tree. Yes, we dehydrate. Yes, we do some cooking, all that kind of stuff. But it is not some chemical reaction that changes around. So that is in itself speaks to a specific customer base. And it also speaks to a customer base which has become used to accepting lower quality food, but that might, so higher quality food, I'm sorry, that does not taste as well. But now you have Jus Chill products and they're coming around and say, wait, this is a high quality food and it tastes great. So that in itself tells a story to our customer base. And the best marketing you can ever have, at least for us, is word of mouth. So when people try your product, and I've seen this in New York, we went to the Jars Center in New York a few years ago, and we did tasting, mainly for a pancake mix or muffin mix. And we saw people come by 3 days in a row while we were at the show to test the product for the first time. And interestingly, each time they came by, they brought someone else. And even when they don't come by, someone else came by and say, oh, so-and-so sent me and said that we had to come over here and try this product. So for us, I think the quality of the product we make has to really be one of those driving factors, because we're not like flush with $1 billion that we're going to go out there and put up billboards all over the city and say, hey, we got this thing called Breadfruit, you want to come try it? So our strategy and my role as the founder, as the CEO, my role has to be, how am I aligning my strategy with our resources to get to our end goal? And so our strategy is not necessarily a billboard strategy right now because we don't have the resources to cap that. But what we do have, we have a great tasting product. We got great stories. We got a great ingredient list. We got a simple idea built around food, which is food is supposed to be simple. It's supposed to nourish you, and it's supposed to actually make you a better, like it's supposed to make you better consuming it. And so we try to build on top of those story, and I think it connects well with our customer segment. And for us, one of the reasons we talk so much about the production, because the production part was like one of our big problem for a long time that we have to work to overcome, and we're still working to overcome. But connecting that story to the customer, to the market, I think has been going fairly well, both locally and internationally.
Excellent, excellent. I see quite a few people have joined us that were not here at the very beginning. So I'm going to just reintroduce Javion Blake, who is the owner and leader of Jus Chill International. Javion is an engineer by training from Jamaica. He grew up enjoying breadfruit. He realized what a wonderful food that was and has created a business with several different products, no preservatives, the tastiness, the nutrition of breadfruit, and he's building a very successful business. And so that's who we're talking with, and we appreciate Javion. We very much appreciate your time. You know, one of the things I used to joke about was that you never heard the words gluten-free and tasty in the same sentence until you came across breadfruit. And so it's gluten-free and it's tasty. And so it is a great product once we can get our business started, our products, our marketing, our exporting. And so Javion has triumphed over a lot of different little obstacles, and we can talk about that when we, later on in the discussion. But before we talk about obstacles and skills needed and so on, Javion, what do you have a view as to what is your greatest success? Is there something about your business, your accomplishments that you feel particularly proud of?
That's a great question. It swings my mind a little bit because it's a little bit different from thinking about numbers and metrics. I think one of the greatest piece of this experience so far, from a business standpoint, or I think is truly understanding the concept that there's no such thing as like business doing business with business. It's people doing business with people through a business system. And so the people aspect of the business are after the project so far, I think has been one of the great like success part of it, where it's like I remember like being in Germany, and I was a part of this envoy, I guess you call it, and we went to visit like the Bundestag in Germany, and we visited a lot of different like locations, and I brought some breadfruit chips. We went to like the UPS locations and the Coca-Cola, whatever, and I brought everybody gets breadfruit chips. It's light and it's easy to pack, and I remember giving their MP, quote unquote MP. I forgot the exact term they used there. And he went home and he's like, "Oh my God, my wife is gluten-free and she tasted this product and she had me going online searching where I can get more of this product." And same thing, in Turkey, I brought some gift to my friends. I remember we were hanging out at their family villa, and we're just like talking about this product, right off the Antalya coast. And it's that aspect of the business that I think has really been, to me, the biggest success of it, is the fact that we can create something. And I think it's the empowering story of it. We can create something, and from that thing that we create, we can really share that with the wider world. And it's like you're contributing to making the world a better place. And to me, that has been, I would say, some of the parts that I really hold dear. Maybe at some point when it's called like a massive financial success, then I would be like, well, the money. But for now, I really truly value the community that has this been able to build. Like the fact that Mr. McLaughlin, I can call him up and say, hey, I have this idea. Like, you're part of that community that I can reach out to. And you guys are always like pointing me to different resources, like, hey, maybe this might be some interest to you. Maybe this might be an interest. Like that, and that community now stretches like across the world, you know. It stretches across the Caribbean, the region, not America. Like we have product right now in Montreal, you know. And so to me, it's that part to me is the part that I feel like I value the most.
That's wonderful. So you are a successful business person, but you also have a mission. And so you're actually making the world a better place, better nutrition, bringing people together. I mean, there's a lot of successes there, and we just really enjoy seeing that. Um, Tell us a little bit about some of the products you mentioned. That is only four ingredients. Is that really right? Is that do you want to
Yep.
tell a little bit more? You don't have to reveal your trade secrets, but you, as we
Yeah.
hear about avoiding ultra processed foods, you know, you buy some foods in the supermarket and it has 20 different ingredients and you can't even pronounce the name of those ingredients, but you're dealing with just a small number of ingredients.
Yes, and that's on purpose. Again, because I think sometimes, aside from just thinking about what does the customer want, I think to myself, like, what do I feel good putting out there into the market? Yes, our products do. So our dry mix does have four ingredients. You do add additional ingredients when you're making our pancake mix or when you're making our cake mix. Those are all ingredients that we say all ingredients in our products are proposed in our products you can find in your grandmother's cabinet. So you're not finding emulsifiers and all of these different kind of additives, to life. And a part of that comes from what do I genuinely feel good going out there to promote? Because if I don't want to eat a certain thing, me going out there and saying, hey, you should buy this thing because I think this is the next best thing ever, to me feel disingenuous. And so that's why we spend so much time like fine tuning our products. So for example, our muffin mix, again, only have four ingredients in there. Our breadfruit chips, the classic sea salt flavor, literally only has three ingredients in there. The pancake mix, the same, has four ingredients in there. And most of that ingredient that's in there is actually like breadfruit. The other things are really just there because they're there to like enhance or for some other practical, functional reason. But at the same time, try to minimize whatever that impact is that's gonna like have on the environment, have on your body, and all of that considered.
What are your plans for the future? I mean, you're already successful. You've got a range of products. You've got your supply chain in place, your packaging, you know, I mean, there's a lot of things working well. What you plan to add additional products? Like, what are your plans for the future?
That's a good question. For us, there's two sides to it because we go to the store and they're like, oh well, just you need to come up with some more new products, man, because the products are you guys make are great. And for us though, and maybe this is coming from an engineering standpoint, in that we rather do a few products well, standardize those processes, and then we can add additional products. What we don't want to be doing is known for the guys that have the Chinese restaurant menu, where we have 500 different products, but we can't really produce them at scale because there's not really that like synergy between the different product lines.
Mhm.
And so for us right now, our near term is really to expand in terms of our capabilities and also our market to get more of these products into the market. And then maybe later on a more midterm plan, it could be like, okay, we're still keeping the R&D backlog of items that we can really bring to the market, but how much resources we're going to spend into bringing new items to the market in the near term is probably minimal. What we can do more easily is figure out like, okay, now that we have this product, what are some other ways we could incorporate this into our market segment? So, like maybe we can do some charcuterie board with like, breadfruit chips or something of that nature. But still keeping it to the baseline of like increasing and standardizing our products that we currently have, increasing that market accessibility of the products we currently have. And then from there, when we can have a dedicated resource to pushing new product into the market, then that can become a focus.
Fantastic, fantastic. Just a quick aside is that for folks in our audience, we've got folks from Jamaica, Haiti, Ecuador, Ghana, um, Belize. We're just delighted to have a group as diverse as this, Guadeloupe, um, Uganda. So we're kind of all over the world. There's a lot of people interested in this topic. And so one of the key questions I have for you, Javion, not everybody is going to be as charismatic as you and as good a problem solver, but what advice would you give? So I think some of the people in our audience today are either they're entrepreneurs themselves or they want to be. They have some of the same ideas as you in terms of feeding the world, planting more trees because that's good for the environment, making a little money because when you're making a little money, when you're profitable, you can keep going. If you're not profitable, you always need help from the outside. But what's really success is when you're making your own money and then you're not relying on other people all the time. So, what advice would you give? What skills do people need? Do you need to start with a lot of money? You know, what mistakes you want to try to avoid. So this is really classroom time now. If you want to start your own business, you listen to what Mr. Javion Blake has to say. He's done it.
Well, thanks for that. I still consider myself a novice, so I'm still learning. But at the same time, I would say this: so I used to spend a lot of time going around to these entrepreneurial communities, and I realized I would hear people like, "Oh, I have this idea for making this next thing. It's going to change the world." And then they go like, "Okay, so what do you want to start?" And they would always almost say $1 million or $2 million, $10 million. I don't know, like they just figure like you can just raise money and solve these problems. Um, and I honestly think that's one of the misconceptions about entrepreneurship. Um, as an entrepreneur, I think you signed up to solve problems, and specifically those problems that someone else hasn't solved yet, or haven't solved it as good as the way it could be solved. So there's still an opportunity. The current versus the ideal, that's the opportunity gap that entrepreneurs are really there to bridge. And then from there, we can find value. And hopefully a profitable solution exists, because then the profitable solution, as Mike pointed out, leads to self-sustainability. So one of the ways I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, one of the ways I think to proceed with any kind of business idea is, if you think of a way how you can solve a problem, find someone in that market segment that you think you would be solving that problem for, and find the most rudimentary solution, create the most rudimentary solution that you could come up with. In the lean startup space is considered the MVP product. And you take that concept, don't think about making it scalable. Think about like how you can solve the problem for like 500 people right now with using one resource. Think of like, how can you solve this one person's problem? Go to them and say, "Hey, I see that you have this problem. Do you want a solution for that? How much are you willing to pay for this solution? Does this thing actually solve your problem?" And then from there, you collect data points and you kind of extrapolate from there. And you kind of expand from 1 to 2 to 2 to 3. I have a good example. I think it's Reid Hoffman, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's the Netflix founder. And he was talking about, he saw something that I saw constantly as well, where it's like, he went to give this speech to the college, and this young lady was like, she wanted to start a clothing exchange business. And the idea was, she's gonna like create this platform. People on campus or around the world or around the country or something are going to come on. They're going to like wear a shirt or wear a dress or whatever, then put it up, and then somebody else takes it and wear it, and da da da. And she just needs $500,000 to get a website started, and buy inventory and all this stuff. And he said, okay, I hear you. And so he asked her, like, so what happened when someone spills some wine on the dress? Who's responsible for that? And she's like, I haven't really thought about that deeply yet. And then all these different things. And he said, okay, do you have a pen, a piece of pen and a piece of paper? And she said, yes. She's like, she's a college student. She has a pen and paper. He said, how about you do this? Write on this pen and paper, I have dresses for rent or something of the sort. Tape it on your door. And if you tape it on your door and then say, if you want to rent this dress or dresses or see what I have, please knock. And from there, if you see people knock, then you can say, let me now go to the next stage, you know? But at the same time, you're testing your hypothesis, because that's the biggest thing with entrepreneurs. And as entrepreneurs, we're naturally like optimistic people. We think the world is gonna want this great next solution we're bringing, which is great because you need a motivation. And that's the next thing to think about. Always think about the tools that are going to keep you motivated, because that is going to be one of your biggest driver towards success, is to remain motivated. The problem is that many times the solution we bring to the world might not necessarily reflect a problem that the world think it has. And so you're always going to have to be fine-tuning and coming up with different ways how we can solve this problem. And until the world sees the problem they have in the same way that they see your solution being able to fit that, you're not going to have what they call a product market fit, essentially. And so don't be afraid to like really test your ideas in reality. And especially when you test your ideas in reality, when someone says, yeah, this is an idea that I would definitely pay for, that's when you say, okay, cool, it's going to be $20, and then see what happens. Most cases, people are going to be like, this, but that's kind of when you really get that true feedback, because when now someone has to exchange something of value to them to get the value that you're trying to deliver, then that's when you really get the feedback that would make sense.
This is just brilliant. So I'm making notes as well, you know. So as JV and you're talking, a lot of different ideas there that a lot of people might not have thought of. One of the things, a point that I want to make is that, you know, we've talked to a lot of people about becoming entrepreneurs, and there's a little bit of an attitude of, well, I'm going to be in competition with somebody else. And the market, you know, I might not be able to be successful because there's only so many customers. And I want to point out that I think that's a wrong concept. And Javion, I'm going to ask if you agree with what I'm about to say. But having more vendors, more entrepreneurs, more breadfruit products in the market, I think is not competition. I think that helps to build the market. And one example I'm going to give, in the States here, we have people from all over. I think I forgot to mention Guatemala. And if I forgot anybody else, sorry. But I think we have like 50 people on the line here, so it's terrific. But all right, in the States here, you're driving along and you will see car dealerships all together. So there's Chevrolet and there's Toyota and there's Audi and all these other Chrysler, all these different brands. And they're not competition for each other. They are. But the fact that they are there together actually brings customers in that might not go to an isolated vendor, right? So if your car dealership is far away from everybody else, only the customers that are really interested are going to come to you. So what I want to say to folks, tell me if you agree, is that having more entrepreneurs in this space is not hurting each other. In a way, it's helping. It's building, it's making that market seem more credible.
No, I think you have a valid point. I would put a little caveat in there and says, as long as one of us is not necessarily just like fully copying the other. And what I mean by that is, if we're in the market segment and we're creating value in that market segment, you definitely want as many players in that market segment as much as possible. Because what that does, it amplifies the voice that you are not the only person. Because for you to tell that story by yourself as one person playing in the space, people are gonna look at it and be like, well, if it was like something serious, there would be more people in there. So people don't take it as serious when it's just like one single player in that market segment. Unless it gets to the point where you're a monopoly and you just dominate that market by basically consuming your other competition or so-called competition. For us, we don't necessarily focus too much on the competition. We focus on like how we can deliver the value. So there's two different ways to think about this thing. There's a product and then there's a value. There's a saying that's like, no one goes to the store to buy a drill. They go to the store to fix a whole problem. And so for us, it's like, even if we're selling the same drill, what story can we tell to our market that would make our solution the solution that they want to actually apply? And when we can tell our story and someone else tell their story, but as long as it's amplifying the voice on which this thing sits, which is breadfruit as the new superfood that everyone needs to know, that's only going to further expand the market to more people and bring more awareness around this product. So now, instead of someone going to the store and don't even know your product exists, they're going to the store and be like, should I get Jus Chill? Should I get someone else? Should I get someone else? And that's a better position to be in, because now you are a part of that consideration. You are a part of that conversation. So 100%, the more people in this segment will definitely help to push the breadfruit story forward. For example, for us, like, we have no interest in going into what we call like whole vacuum pack breadfruits. But I can tell you that is a massive market opportunity for anybody looking to get into like vacuum pack breadfruit, prepare breadfruit. But that's not really our story. We're not in that segment, but we can still see the value of having that segment in play, because that's probably going to be one of the things. Get to the restaurants. You know what? Jamaica restaurants are pretty popular. So you got Americans going to Jamaican restaurants and they're going to eat now this thing called breadfruit. And they're going to be like, I never heard about breadfruit. But now, what else is there in breadfruit? And then, so that expands our storyline. And then in addition to that, another thing to consider is, think about the gluten-free sector right now in America. I think just in America numbers, I think it's somewhere around, if I'm not mistaken, it's about $36 billion or something. And I think it's projected to grow year on year, about 10% per year for the next 5-10 years or something like that, if I'm not mistaken. Now, you might hear 10% growth in the gluten-free segment, and you think to yourself, like, wait, that's a small growth number, but that's $36 billion, which means that 10% of $36 billion is $3.6 billion. If you grow at $3.6 billion per year, and people are avoiding that food that have a bunch of additives that people don't want to eat anymore, you're even going to now encroaching more into like that gluten-free section that the gluten-free section already exists. So now you're going from that, and like you're saying $36 billion, $3.6 billion is the segment of the market that which now breadfruit can potentially capture, right? That's not going to be one Caribbean producer, one Latin American producer, one African producer, one Pacific. Like, that's going to take just $1 billion of market for us to sell into with gluten-free product is going to require 100% more than one continent of the areas that have breadfruit. So the competition we're thinking of is probably because we're looking at one specific market. So which is why, as I said, like, as long as you're not fully competing. So if you watch us do something and let's say I go to one location and I say, oh, I want to have breadfruit in there. And then you're like, oh, you're going to follow me and do the same thing at that location. Then yes, you're essentially creating unnecessary competition. But if I go to one segment, one region, and I say, oh, I want to have breadfruit in here. And then you're like, okay, you know what? Maybe I can do the same thing with this region over here. Maybe I can do the same thing with this different segment over here. Then that amplifies the voice, and then that amplifies altogether the industry that we're all trying to build, because it's going to require us to build together this industry before it can become mature enough to where we can be supplying $1 billion, which is less than the actual expected growth of the gluten-free segment in the US alone.
I think that's a valid point, which is that the marketplace is so huge. There's no way, all the people on this call, if you're producing high quality breadfruit products, you just couldn't meet a fraction of that market. It's so huge, especially as there's so many people with gluten intolerance or celiac disease. And so again, it's breadfruit and it's tasty. I only have like one or two more quick questions for Javion. So for those in the audience, and we've got quite a group here, quite a lot of countries, if you have a question for Javion that we haven't asked yet, put that in the chat real quickly and I can read those out. We'll have a little bit of time at the end here. We have probably another 15 minutes or so for some questions. So think about that if there's anything that we haven't covered. There's one thing I can think of that we haven't covered, Javion, and it's the question of a local marketplace versus an export. So we have a lot of people saying, "Oh, let me plant some breadfruit trees. I want to start exporting." To me, that's a big challenge. And so, what I would usually say to those people, build your capability domestically at first, whether you're in Jamaica, you're in Haiti, you're in Guadeloupe, you're in Ecuador, wherever you are, serve your local market, build your capacity, get your costs down, keep your quality high, get all your logistics problems solved locally. And then when you're ready to gear up, you gear up, you can go into the export market. If you make a mistake while you're building your business, it's a small mistake. You can fix that. But if you start out too big, you might make a big mistake. I mean, would you agree with that approach, local versus export? Is that the best way to start?
Uh, I agree. I agree for the most part. I think it's, and I say for the most part because it depends on how are you able to partner to get to that export goal. Now, if you're gonna just like plant some trees and like start exporting breadfruit all by yourself, that would be a massive undertaking, honestly. And it might not necessarily be the best use of resources. But if you have, if while these breadfruit trees are now growing into maturity to start producing, you start building this relationship with like export partners and these different entities, then you might now have an export market to sell into. Um, However, at the same time, I would say that your approach of like developing the capacity locally and then try to fine tune that and then going and like taking on the export market, I would say is a better approach for you doing it because there's a lot of things that you're going to think is going to work and it's going to work exactly the way you think it is. That is not going to work that way. And I guarantee you, like, it doesn't matter how well your business plan is. I think it's like Franklin D. Roosevelt that said something like a plan is useless, but planning is priceless. So it's good that you get to like sit down and walk through the plan and walk through the idea, walk through all the different things that can happen. But once you actually start colliding your idea with reality, like most of it's going to go out the window. So it depends on like your capacity and really the resources you have at hand, your network that you have at hand. Like it's really all these things. It's also about like, are you trying to build a brand or are you trying to just be like a white label? Are you trying to like get into mass market? Or are you trying to like, you know, supply to like a niche market? For example, if you just want to sell like roast, you know, breadfruit to, let's say, Jamaican restaurants, then you know, it's an easier sell to that locale. You just have to figure out how you're going to get your products there. And in that case, you might have people who already have those contacts that you can work with to supply them. And then that will help to stabilize the market and then help the market to grow. So in any case, I think starting out the smallest you can, the most geographically constrained you can is probably is gonna yield you the highest rate of success. Because once you start interacting with the different market forces, you're gonna be spending a lot of time doing a lot of things that you never thought you would be needing to do. And if you don't have the resources or the time or the expertise to do that, it's just gonna further frustrate you and like really probably demotivate you going forward. I don't know if that kind of answers the question what you're trying to ask.
You answer my question and more. So very good. All right, I'm going to take a breath and I'm going to say, If the audience has some questions, hold up your hand, we'll recognize you, and you can speak verbally, or you can put more questions. One question came in through the chat, which is a little bit more detailed than we might be able to fully answer. But part of the question is, what are the skills that an entrepreneur would need to start a business and be as successful and with the potential that you have? Is there, if you don't have the full set of skills, what should we kind of work on?
I think probably the most important answer is going to be, it's going to sound strange, but it's really a growth mindset. It's the mindset to allow you to know that there's a lot of things you don't know, but you have the ability to learn what you don't know. There's a lot of things that you're not talented at, but you might be able to like partner with someone that does, or leverage the resources of someone that does. And so to me, that's one of the biggest piece, is that growth mindset, is the fact that you have neuroplasticity, meaning that you have the ability to learn new things and do new things. But you just have to kind of figure out, get motivated and focused that that's something you want to actually do. Secondary to that, I think we're starting a business, because the aspect of people to people is important. Your communication skill is going to be essential. Like your ability to communicate your idea. And it's not just like talking English and like, oh, someone hear what I'm saying. It's like really listening to, whether it's your market, whether it's your partner, whether it's like your supplier, whether it's your staff, all of that, like actually hearing what they're saying beyond just what they are saying, if that makes sense. And try as best as possible to set up structures and systems that can kind of help to take you away. So your job as an entrepreneur, which is something I found out, which is interesting. Your job as an entrepreneur is to basically make yourself redundant. What I mean by that is your job is to figure out how to find the best resources, the best people, and the best things to actually make whatever you're doing no longer necessary for you to do. I'm hoping that's like communicating. I'm trying my best to like say it in a way that I think most people can understand it. So your job is not to be the best person doing everything in your company or with your brand. Your job is to figure out how to find the best people to do it better than you. And then, or even if they're doing it 50% like you would do it. And so that you can move on to other things that keeps the business, the brand, the company, the project, whatever it is, you keep it moving it to that next phase. And I think that can only come with a growth mindset. You have to detach yourself. Your ego has to be checked.
That's, that's beautiful. So we had one person that contacted us. This was a year or a couple of years ago, and he says, trees that feed, you give away fruit trees. So I want to get some breadfruit trees. I'm going to plant them, and then I'm going to build a processing factory, and then I'm going to export to the United States and Europe. And this person had in mind that they had to do everything from propagating the trees, planting, pruning, reaping, grinding, shredding, drying, packaging, the artwork for the package. I mean, there is no one person that can do everything well. You can do a little bit of everything. You have to be kind of a jack of all trades, right? But yes, as you say, you don't have to do it alone, and you might be really good at growing trees, or you might be really good at processing, and you do that. Um, so this is a very, very helpful, very interesting. Some good questions are coming in, and let me quickly add that if we don't get to all the questions that come in and all the detailed answers that we're looking for, we're going to share these with Javion. And if you give your contact information, we will be able to get back to you afterwards and kind of give some of these answers. A couple of the questions coming in. What do you do, Javion, about breadfruit, because the trees don't bear all year round? I think that was a very good question. So if you're not in breadfruit season, can you keep your business going?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it kind of allude back to the conversation I had earlier, why we develop these different product lines. Because, for example, like our dry mix products like have a longer shelf life. Our chip products has a relatively long shelf life as well, considered for like snack foods. So what that does, it allows us to kind of like level out as much as like what we can deliver to the market over time. And that was also a part of our calculation going into some of these products in the first place was this is an item. This is one of the reason why breadfruit is not as popular as like a banana or something of that sort. Well, that's a different story. But one of the reasons why it's not as popular as many of these other fruits is because it has a limited shelf life. So we now bringing breadfruit to the mainstream market or to the rest of the market, we now have to figure out a way how to get that shelf life to be a certain level. The plus side with that is when you produce in like peak time, let's say, for example, when breadfruit's available, we now have the ability to supply that to the market across the different times when it might not necessarily be as available. And also, like, depends on your geographical location, you have different like periods of time that breadfruit will come into season. And so that's another edge against how you're able to like source breadfruit for those times when it might not be popular in one region. It might be popular in the next region, might be popular in the next country and stuff of that nature. So there are several ways you have to kind of figure out how to balance that out.
Very good. Very good. One of the other questions came in that asked about how do you hire and train reliable staff? In fact, when you and I were talking before this masterclass started, you made the comment voluntarily that people skills are needed. And so, is there some magic, some tip that you would give us as to how to deal with people, whether it's staff, whether it's customers, whoever that leads to your success?
That's a great question. I think the first thing to know is that this will never be a solved problem. Like there's never a past tense of like, I used to have like workforce problem and all of a sudden like everything is great. I think I think human resources are a continuous aspect of the business in terms of you developing and scaling. But I also want to point out here, which like, even though I'm sitting here talking to you as the founder, as the CEO of this company, I'm not the only person that's making like things happen. I would say like one of the persons. So for so like hiring a staff to do the daily operations might not necessarily be as like, okay, my expertise, but like, you know what? I know when to kind of step away, especially when we found someone who can do that. Like Miss Nicole McFarlane, like she runs our operation in terms of from a production standpoint. And she essentially has a way better way of connecting the dots with the daily minutia that's the staff, the team would need to do to produce a certain amount. And she gives us a detailed report. And yes, I will ask question and I will like nudge a little bit and say, hey, like, this or, but like, I just kind of like, I've basically like worked my way out of that, the need to do that. And I just have to trust the other people on the team that they are also going to deliver. Like my business partner now, Dr. Conway Garden, like he does a lot of the other things as well. And it's like, okay, he does it in such a great way that like, I don't need to be there, like having to do everything. We're setting up, we just recently like trying to roll out like a sales team. I have to be more like engaged in that right now, but I can guarantee you like every engagement I have in that right now is to figure out, is there a point in time and how can I figure out how to get my way out of this job to have someone else do it? And that's a question I ask all the time. But at the same time, I have to kind of train them as much as possible when they go out to represent the brand, when they go to do their tasting, when they go out to talk to customers and all these kind of things. I have to train them now, but that doesn't necessarily need to be the path forward. It's yeah.
Excellent. We have about 60 seconds left. I have one more question for you. Very good question just came in, and Mary and I had been talking about this a little bit. Is it better to cook the breadfruit before you dry it, before you process it? Does that matter? Have you explored different ways of processing without giving away all your secrets? But is that something that you're thinking about?
No, I'm more like a scientist when it comes to like some of these things, when I'm not necessarily like wearing the R&D cap per se. And
Sure.
so I think of when we have a system that kind of like work and we kind of have data on how that interacts with our consumer, we try to lock that in, develop SOPs, and kind of like control that for that variation. And then we leave that other part of it, as a part of our R&D backlog.
Excellent, excellent. Well, that's the end of our time. I want to thank everyone. Natasha, who helped to get this going. Natasha, be sure to save the chat. I think there's a way to do that. So we save everybody's contact information. And then we're saving the questions that came up that we didn't have time to dive into. All right. So we're going to get back to people. We had 50 attendees, which I exceeded my expectations. Many, many different countries, at least 10 or 12 different countries. We got truly a masterclass from an expert. Javion, I can't begin to tell you how proud we are of you and your success and your generosity to share all of this information with everyone. This is the spirit, really, of making the world a better place, feeding people. We got healthier families, the trees that we've planted, where the fruit are coming from. That's helping the environment, cleaning the air, keeping the soil healthy. So you, my friend, are doing a fantastic job. We thank you. I have to give more than a little shout out to my beautiful bride named Mary, who is really the genius behind all of the good things that Trees That Feed Foundation is doing, is trying to do, trying to make the world a little bit better place here. So, Javion, thank you very much. When we're all done here, when we're done with our meeting, we're going to share some questions with you that came in. And as when you have some time, you can respond to those folks. So we do want to share everything. We believe in sharing information. We're not hiding any information. We share that with the whole world if we can, as best we know and as best. I like to joke, I'm not an expert, but I have friends that are experts. And so that's how we share. So, Javion, my friend, thank you so much. You've done a fantastic job, and we can't wait to talk with you some more again in the future, okay?
Thank you very much. And thank you for all the work that Trees of Feed does. It's a really outstanding and really admirable.
Fantastic, fantastic. All right, everybody, thank you very much, and let's all stay in touch. Let's all stay in touch.
Bye,
Take care.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Javion, can you hear? Or did you sign off?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, thank you very much. This really was enlightening. I would have liked to have heard from people directly. I don't know if we can stay on for a few more minutes, if there's anybody who can speak directly to you, or if our time is off. But I know there were farmers here who want to sell breadfruit flour to you. I know there are a lot of people in Haiti that are making breadfruit flour. They're looking for a market. So there are lots of things that we can move on with in the future to expand this entire program.
Okay. No, and definitely, a lot of information that comes through you, we can definitely figure out ways. Haiti's a little bit harder at the moment, but I'm pretty sure as we kind of figure out ways how we can work together across borders, we can definitely make something work. I do have a few minutes if anybody has specific questions before I have to jump off. But
I will let whoever has to speak. I think maybe about five or so more minutes. Anybody
Okay.
who wants to speak, just jump in. Unlock your mic and jump in.
Hi, thank you. Paul here. What's the average price per pound of breadfruit flour versus wheat flour?
I think that might vary across different markets. In Jamaica, roughly it's about anywhere between $4 and $5 in Jamaica, I would say. But I think that varies across many different markets. For us, when we buy it in wholesale bulk, obviously there's a difference in cost to it, but that on the retail market, that's kind of what I've seen it going for.
But the breadfruit flour would be more expensive, you think?
Oh yes. So the breadfruit flour is more expensive traditional than the wheat flour. A part of that comes from a volume aspect because, you know, when you're producing wheat, most of these companies producing wheat are producing tons and tons, whereas the breadfruit flour production is still producing, we're still in the pounds, you know,
And
metric.
how does the dwarf breadfruit tree hold up versus the traditional tall trees in terms of the weight of the fruit on the branches?
I'm not sure if I understand. In terms of one of the things we try to get our farmers to do as much as possible is to prune the trees, because it helps in many ways. Picking, so like you have a higher rate of getting breadfruit, like ripping breadfruit when you have like smaller trees. And then you also have a better, the nutrients in the ground actually supply actually more valuable parts of the tree as opposed to just having like really tall trees. Because one of the things with breadfruit trees is that the wood itself is fairly soft. So then you don't want people to have to climb up too high because it has the ability to break fairly easily.
So
And
you do promote dwarf trees versus the traditional tall ones. Is that
oh yes, 100%.
so the weight of the fruit it doesn't give it doesn't cause breakage of the branches since the trees are smaller. That doesn't happen. Is that something that happens?
I haven't seen much of that, to be honest. I mean, I was in St. Mary, Jamaica a few weeks back, and like I've seen many like breadfruits on a very like, you know, like a very compact segment, and it hold up pretty well. So I haven't seen much cases where the breadfruits themselves are like breaking the leaves. The more cases I've seen is where the breadfruits, you know, the stem gets yellow or something, and then it's like falls off. Where lack of nutrition, lack of adequate nutrition, or just something else goes wrong with the breadfruit itself. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I'm just used to the old-fashioned tall breadfruit trees that you have to climb way up, you know, to get the breadfruit. But I knew that dwarf trees would make a lot make production much more easier. I just wondered what would the weight of the fruit be on the smaller
Yeah.
tree.
Yeah, we've definitely I've personally encountered more problems with tall trees because like even like last week, for example, we were supposed to get some supplies off a tree, and because it rained, I think the day before, it actually like increased the price of the fruit because the pickers were afraid to climb a lot of the trees.
Yeah.
So we've seen more problems with the tall trees being a limitation to scalability than
Sure.
we have seen the short trees being a problem to like breakages and stuff like that in the branches.
How about the hurricane resistance?
Well, breadfruits do get affected in the hurricane. Breadfruits shake off a lot. Like last year, that impacted us significantly. But at the same time, the good thing about breadfruit is it falls over one time, and then like you go back the next year and you start seeing 3-4 sprouts coming out of the bottom, and possibly like 2 or 3. I've seen that in my yard, for example, where I've seen like one breadfruit sprouting into like 2 breadfruit trees coming out the bottom after a hurricane. So it does help a lot. And the good thing is it's like it blows off. Yes, you lose that crop sometimes throughout the year, but at the same time, after that, it grows right back. It doesn't like affect it significantly outside of that particular season.
And the trees pretty much are stay erect after a major hurricane, or the trees get flattened.
Sometimes the tree gets flattened. Sometimes the tree gets flattened, and that's probably one of the plus side also of having like shorter trees. The shorter the tree, at least from my experience, it tends to hold up a lot more in a hurricane than when the trees are taller. The taller ones tend to topple because I think the root is not as the root of the tree is not as like sturdy in the ground when it gets a lot taller. Well, from a ratio standpoint.
Right. I have an idea how you could really protect against hurricane wind damage. I mean, I ran that by somebody a few years ago, and they encouraged me to get it trademarked at the office in Kingston. I never did that, but I think it would really work fairly well.
Well, now is the time to really innovate with breadfruit because I think, I think this time pushing breadfruit into the mainstream market, I think it's going to be a really successful venture going forward. It might take a few more years to really go fully mainstream. But I think the consciousness of many people have really been developing towards getting breadfruit. So like if you have a patented idea or an idea that you like to patent or somehow have some kind of trademark around, now might be a good time to really expound on that and really start getting your documentation in place so that when we start really needing like, 100 archers of breadfruit, for breadfruit in Jamaica, like we have a solution that will help to alleviate any such problems.
You want to collaborate on this, you and I?
So we're not as focused around the tree aspect, but I think Trees That Feed is definitely the organization that would position you best to connect with the farmers that are growing more of these trees, most of these trees. Because for us, we try to stay in our wheelhouse as much as possible to kind of like, scale and focus. But if there's any way that we can offer any kind of anything we can do to help that become a thing, because that eventually like supports the broader industry, then definitely we can think about that. But for us to take it on and like execute on it fully, that's probably a commitment that's probably currently beyond our wheelhouse.
We're happy to share, but we don't keep secrets. So if there's anything that's private, don't tell us, because that is our philosophy, to share everything. But maybe we can connect you with somebody privately. Anybody else have a burning question? Because I know we're going to run out of time soon.
Yes, yes, good morning.
Hi, good morning.
Yes, just one question quickly. The dwarf trees, do you have a new variety, or is it the same ones that we have now? Do we cut those tops and allow them to spread?
I'll jump in. Javion, let me jump in. About 15 years ago, Trees That Feed brought in a tree from Samoa, which is called a mafala. And it's not really what you call dwarf, because it's not that short. It tends to not grow taller than 25 to 30 feet. So it's still a tall tree. But the best practice is to prune early, prune often. Prune and try to keep your tree at about 25 feet. We will probably have a master class and have Loxley Waits on that, and he will address just pruning. So we'll just do a class on just pruning. That would probably be the best thing for us to do.
That would be appreciated. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yes, I had a question about, this is Terrell. I had a question about the consistency and the flavor profile of the flour. Because I've tasted like homemade, home dried flour, breadfruit flour. And to me, sometimes it's sweeter than others. So how do you guys mitigate that?
Yeah. So one of the things is probably like standardizing as much as possible our suppliers. And so we kind of we have a list of suppliers that we tend to work with. That they tend to produce in a similar consistency. So that has helped us a lot so far. If we do get our flour and it looks completely out of what we normally see, then we probably like revisit that, but we haven't had much of that issue so far. And I think if it's sweeter, it probably has something to do with the maturity of the fruit that you're having in that flour, as opposed to the processing standards.
I guess that's a part of my question as well. At what stage are you guys processing the fruit? And I'm not sure if I came late because I had classes today, but I wanted to find out, that aspect of it to convey to people who have trees.
Terrell,
Yes,
I know your program is in the Bahamas. I'll jump in. We probably will do a master class on the best ways to make breadfruit flour, like for small processors, because I know that Javion buys from large processors that have standards that they follow, and there are factories that meet like USDA standards. But there are people who want to start on a small basis, and I think maybe we'll do a master class on that as well. So
Okay.
maybe we leave that for now.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay.
Do you have a problem with theft?
So we're not focused in the if you're referring to specifically the prettier last name, we're not focused in that area as much. So no. But is that a case of like Could that happen? Definitely. You know, one thing I want to bring up around theft, I think now with the new technologies coming out, I think if you have a large enough farm, you probably should figure out how to invest in like drone technology. That could be something that can help to like at least capture as much information around that as possible. I hope that helps.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So I really appreciate the opportunity here to share with you and spend the time. I do have to jump. I have another engagement I have to step into. But as was mentioned, I look forward to seeing any questions I could probably respond to subsequent to this call. So again, it's a pleasure being here. I really appreciate you considering me for this, and I hope it was valuable for both sides. And I had a great time, and I hopefully it's an impactful time as well.
Thank you, Javion. This is what Jamaicans call a brota, a little extra time. It was over and we got a little extra 15 minutes. So thanks for staying on. Thanks for the questions. And send your questions to us on WhatsApp or email. Go on our website. That's how you can find us.
Well, when you're ready.
Feed.
All right, cool. Thanks.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, guys. We'll end now. Okay.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.